Jimmy Brooks. I will remember that. I've got a good memory. I kill people. And maybe I should have killed you. Should I have killed you, Jimmy Brooks?
Arthur Morgan is the greatest protagonist I have ever seen in a video game. Never have I been so invested in the transformation of a character in any form of entertainment before. Arthur's funny, sarcastic, he had a love interest and even a small family once upon a time. He's a highly respected and very well-feared gunman in the ranks of the Vanderlyn gang. We love Arthur. We feel his pain, his annoyance, his anger, and even his sadness. I do have a massive character analysis of him coming up, and it was while preparing for that video that I wanted to explore the opposing view of Arthur. We all love him, and most, if not many of us, believe Dutch and Micah are much worse than anything Arthur could ever be. Dutch is killed time and again, steadily growing bolder with each instance, clearly becoming more and more reckless, all too willing to leave behind John and even Arthur in order to save his own skin. While Micah, on the other hand, seems to have never considered the moral ramifications of ending a life. The two of them may be equally worthy of being called horrible men that only care about themselves, using the well-being, or in Dutch's case, love and trust of others to push his will and vision of a free world further. But after reviewing some of the comments on my last video discussing when Dutch betrayed Arthur, I noticed quite a few people stated it was the other way around. It was in fact Arthur who had betrayed Dutch. The story of Red Dead Redemption 2 and that of Arthur's character arc is entirely told through the eyes of Arthur, giving us a view of the other members, the story's events, and even Arthur himself, a very biased approach. Arthur's done horrible things throughout his life, both on and off camera. One of the most savage instances was him beating an already terminally ill Thomas Downs on a debt he owes the gang. A debt that's met with a level of brutality by Arthur who almost looks like he takes the debt personally. He even goes so far as to suggest to Downs to sell his wife and property in order to repay the gang's debt.
Where's our money?
I don't have it.
Sell your place.
We already owe more than it's worth.
Then sell your wife, or your family, or something. We ain't your idea of charity. Is that clear?
Thomas!
When he returns later, immediately after robbing the bank of Valentine with the saddlebag stuffed with cash he just made off with, he makes no reservations about sparing the Downs family of the debt, or even their feelings at the loss of the beloved father and husband. He even crosses the boundary further by saying he hopes the hell he finds himself in is hot and terrible, otherwise he'd feel lied to. After saying that, he follows it up with threatening Thomas's son to correct the stare, or he'll soon be reunited with his father.
Either you got a lazy eye or lack of respect. Which is it, boy?
I ain't got no lazy eye. No respect for the likes of you.
Well, maybe when your mother's finished mourning your father, I'll keep her in black, on your behalf. You think on that, boy?
Arthur himself holds no delusions of being a bad man who has done horrible things. In the later chapters of the game, when he starts to make more conscious efforts to be kinder, more forgiving, and helpful of others, he denies having a pure heart of being a kind man. He hides his face in the shame of being identified as something other than what he sees himself as. It's a very difficult thing to convince someone out of their own self-image, perhaps even impossible for a man facing death's door such as Arthur is. He knows these small gestures, so minuscule in size compared to all the actions throughout the rest of his life, they cannot even be counted towards scrubbing away his sins or other transgressions. Yet, we as players can't help but feel bad for him. How many of us felt anger or sadness during the events of Beaver Hollow? Arthur's degree of respect and the ruthlessness that accompanied it in the early hours of the game are long gone. The feeling of trying to save the gang and provide for the other members is swiftly and very sneakily replaced with the feeling of anxiety and sadness for this, in Milton's own words, degenerate murderer. If it wasn't for Arthur's decline in respect or how he was treated by the other members, would we still feel sorry for him? We can look at the evolution of Arthur in two ways. On one hand, he, and I think most people blame his actions on blind loyalty. Blind loyalty to his father, Dutch, who by token is really the entire gang. The gang is named after him, he has the finest clothes and even the most luxurious tent out of all the other members. To go against Dutch is to go against the gang. It's best to just slide into the position he knows best, being an unquestionable brute, something everyone says he is. Most of all, is Hosea. Almost every single mission or interaction Arthur has with Hosea, he's quick to call Arthur big and dumb. Clearly by the contents of Arthur's journal, Arthur can write pretty elegantly, he's educated on the level of being able to read and even draw. Things that aren't as widespread as they are nowadays. Later events in the game show he is capable of empathy, compassion, remorse, and even understanding of the greater repercussions tied to his actions or lack thereof. Yet all of this is pushed aside, not just in the early hours of the game, but prior to the events of the game. It's quite clear that by the time culture rolls Charles around, everyone is older and practically set in their ways. Which means that while Arthur's choices on the outside may not be exactly representative of Dutch's teachings that, at least prior to the events of the game, involve not killing innocent people or chasing the fool's mission of revenge, if we are to believe Dutch and the rest of the gang members actually practice what he preached, it would then be safe to say the ruthlessness in which he pursues Downs Denton, his threatening demeanor towards Jimmy Brooks, or even threatening Kieran after being quote-unquote lied to, would all just be a small representation of how he was and probably always has been. Whether if it was strictly for the gang's benefit and had no emotional investment behind it or personal inclination to give into his own rage, something that is hard to say exactly because we don't see too many instances of Arthur being rageful or succumbing to his own emotions outside anger from the usual suspects such as Micah and Milton, or in the rare occasion of wanting to kill Kieran for quote-unquote lying, or later on in the game when he throws Strauss out of camp out of revulsion from all the jobs Strauss was providing. Either way, the point is I'm trying to say here is there is no doubt he had blind loyalty to Dutch, and much of his actions is of course owed to just listening and refusing to think for himself on some level, but that doesn't fully excuse him. He's not morally bankrupt. In the transition from Horseshoe Overlook to Clemens Point, Charles and Arthur come across a woman and her two small children. Their father had been kidnapped, most likely is going to be killed, and without a doubt is a frightening ordeal for the wife and cowering children who have taken refuge underneath this wagon. Arthur doesn't hesitate to send them on their way, shouting he needs their land. Charles intervenes, asks the children where their father is, and scolds Arthur on their way to rescue him.
What's going on with you?
What do you mean?
You were just going to send that woman and her children on their way?
We're wanted men. We got Pinkertons breathing down our necks. We should be moving camp, not running off on some wild goose chase.
Come on, Arthur. That's not how you are.
Well, maybe you don't know me as well as you think you do.
Now in the moment, Arthur puts up a fair argument, and of course, it's a justifiable excuse. Milton and Roz surprised Arthur and Jack a few days ago by camp, and almost immediately after this, Dutch, Arthur, and John shoot up the town of Valentine. There's too much heat and way too much attention for the two of them to postpone the resettlement of the gang for a grand rescue mission. It's a small thing that's easily overlooked because it's not brought up again, nor is it really given that much attention in the moment. Something I want to point out though, is I feel it is crucial to the point that I'm trying to make here, is even if Arthur is fiercely loyal, he's not lacking self-awareness or reflection. If you take a look at Arthur's journal, he highlights this event specifically, sharing how much he laments at the constant battle of quote-unquote good and evil inside of him, and wishes good just came to him as easily as it does to Charles. This is long before he's ever sick or aware of how sick he is. The fate that awaits him is long ahead of his own knowledge. He's not yet confronted with the bitter reality of being human. And as we are human, we all have our expiration date. During Beaver Hollow, he makes attempts to help out Edith and Archie Downs, people that could be seen, at least from their own eyes, had their lives ruined at the hands of Arthur. Arthur forgives Londonderry's family for the debt they owe, perhaps in a twisted way, reminding him of the state he found the Downs family in after the death of Thomas. Arthur even helps out the nun and other religious figures in Saint Denis. He makes it clear at least once he's not a religious man.
I guess I'm just hoping for a dignified exit.
I shall pray for you.
Oh, I'm not a religious man, sister. I'm an outlaw.
While making a handful of statements time and again that he's not looking for forgiveness or any type of salvation, he knows he is, by his definition, a horrible person, and on some level he is. He is of his own free will after all, and can only attribute some of his worst offenses as something deemed totally necessary for the gang's survival. Even then, you could argue you always have a choice. A choice he actively ignored. It wasn't until he was faced with his own mortality, the love of Mary Linton resurfacing and moving on again, topped off with his respect within his family starting to rapidly dwindle. Even if Rockstar chose to kill off Arthur with tuberculosis, I don't believe the level of love or sympathy would have been achieved for Arthur as it was if it wasn't for these instances of vulnerability. Sure, Arthur's journal gives added depth and some extra insight into the mind of Dutch's most ruthless gunman, some added food for thought, something else to explore behind the scenes, but if it wasn't for the way Rockstar humanizes Arthur over time, from Mary's involvement to how he bonds with Lenny and Hosea, the soft spot he has for John that comes off as nothing but anger and resentment at the beginning of the game. Resentment that turns out to be nothing more than hurt and a sense of betrayal, similar to how a sibling would be disappointed for being so easily thrown away by another sibling. While Arthur has the saddest, most peaceful endings of all time, the question for you remains, did Arthur manage to redeem himself in the small amount of time he finally broke free from Dutch's illusions? Or is even death as peaceful as this too respectful for a man that's dedicated his life to brutality, executing whatever means necessary to achieve the paradise he wholeheartedly believed in?